Hello.
Hello. You need to move them up. Hello.
Hello. I'm the app graveyard.
You're the app graveyard. Oh, I love
Yeah.
that.
I'm a legacy app.
You're the technical dev.
I'm a horrible CTO. Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome everybody
Terrified.
to the Halloween horror stories, to Death horror stories. Um, Adrian, what did you have in mind for today?
Uh, I'm not Adrian.
You're not Adrian.
No, I'm not Adrian.
You're a ghost from the past.
Yeah. I'm. Yeah. No, never mind. So what do we actually have on mind? So maybe I put that away now, just in case, so people might think it was me, but it wasn't. Um, we want to talk about horror stories. So the stories when development goes wrong, when things happen which are actually horrible, and what just talking about those, I think we should have a very easy session today. It is not very educational. It's more should be funny, like a little bit like in talking about what can actually go wrong and what is very much horrifying in that moment, but in
Mm-hmm.
hindsight quite funny. So when I was reading like your 30K bill, well, that's not funny. In hindsight, probably it is, but
It
it
is
could
in hindsight.
in hindsight maybe yes, especially when it's not your money. But maybe it's a different thing when it's the money of someone else. Well, you need to see, right?
It's always someone's money.
And sometimes those stories are, let's say, quite easy. So we have stories like where developers simply mess up things, right? And I can tell a little story there as well. And
Mm-hmm.
probably you have some stories mentioned as well. I'm I'm quite curious. So we actually wanted to have something like we close ourselves as a scrum master and stuff like that. But let's talk about stories today, right? And you had talked about disastrous deployments. So developers very often actually don't deploy things, and sometimes they need to deploy things. And let's say things aren't very well made often, right? So yeah, sometimes you don't have. Let's say a good pipeline. Sometimes you don't have tests and you need to do something and something goes wrong and wrong again.
Mm-hmm.
And problems stack up and you want to fix the fix, and suddenly you are in a loop of fixes and it's a deadlock of problems, and you're becoming more terrified with everything you do, and you start to create some form of self-doubt, right? Do you want to tell
Mm-hmm.
a story about that? Because you have mentioned that story about the disastrous deployment stuff. Do we want to go over that?
Oh, hang on. You need to give me some more context because now I can't remember which one that was. I gave you
It
three
was
examples, right?
three, yeah. You gave me three.
I gave you two examples. It didn't give any disastrous deployment examples. I gave you three examples. I said the surprise 30,000 euro bill,
Oh yeah, yeah.
4 weeks of distributed debugging, and startup politics. Those
Oh,
were three
I
stories
missed that one.
that
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
prepped for you.
So let's
But
go
I did
ahead. Go with your favorite one. Tell us a story about what actually went wrong. Horrible.
none of these are my favorite. Like none of these stories are I'd say they have a positive lining now in hindsight, but in the moment, they're just a miserable experience for everybody involved. I mean, I think the worst was that 30,000 euro cloud bill, um, because it was my first job. I was 18 years old, I think, coming into my sort of second year in software as a sort of junior slash intern slash student, sort of like a junior intern. We were working on a project, fresh technology. We're using um, Adobe's Flash Media Server.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the first sort of cloud. Uh, think of it like a mix of a video transcoder, multicast, and a way to have um, full duplex socket connections through into the browser through Flash.
Hmm.
but in
Good old flash time.
2007, right? So this was prior to WebSockets or anything
You are
equivalent.
old. You are old. Sorry. You are old.
I
Yes.
just aged myself.
You
So the point was,
great point.
um, we we didn't know that the most expensive bit. We thought the most expensive bit would be CPU time, and we weren't actually using it for transcoding video. We are using it to host a multiplayer chat for a very large, um, sort of board game, online game community. That was the project. We had a client who specialized in online games and then running ads on those platforms. Um, so we said, okay, we're not going to transcribe video. This is going to be cheap. Um, and what we ended up doing was basically host using it for socket communication, all sorts of socket communication. And then the client had this like brilliant idea of hosting multiplayer games on those sockets. It was just a convenient fit of technology. We didn't have to sort of implement any kind of backend persistent backend solution for hosting games. You could just use the media servers, open socket connections to funnel data to and from um, players, essentially. And the games got really wordy. There's a lot of text in the games. Large XMLs got passed around. Uh, And then a few months later, we figured out that actually one of the biggest costs was egress costs, so network costs.
Mm-hmm.
But they were priced assuming that it was going to be sending video streams. But since we used the sockets to pass copious amounts of text and we didn't know that it was expensive, we got quite uh, generous, let's say, in how much text we're passing in between the games and game state, passing full game state where needed in order to do like a clean, quick refresh for the player. And it ended up, and we duplicated the entire logic on our staging server as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then at a certain point, just the deployment of the system that ran a quick health check ended up, raking up a 30,000 euro bill due to those network costs. Now, that in itself is a horror story. The bigger issue is that this was like a project nobody liked. So this was a referral client that nobody wanted to work for. It came from one of our big whale clients as a referral. It was someone's cousin, and they said, "Hey, can you guys build
Great
like
opportunity
boost this platform?" So
to
nobody wanted
work.
to work on it. It was kind of like an experiment. Um, it didn't have a lot of traffic. It didn't get really a lot of like quality touches.
But you got this thank you mail from Adobe, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Adobe was super happy. Like we were a great client
Oh,
for
great
Adobe.
client, great client.
Yeah, yeah. So
Sending
that
a
was one
bottom
of them.
line.
And like so it was politically charged. There was that toxicity involved with how we acquired the client and how the client treated us. And then somebody had to break the bad news, and then I also didn't know, what to think of it. Was, like we're not we're not gonna make a profit from the project. So what are we doing now? We can't undo this. Um, what's the next step? Who's gonna eat the costs? So it was a whole bunch of um, you know negatives there. Yeah, that's one of my stories. I mean, I really remember that one because in the moment it was really intense. Plus,
Yeah, yeah.
we were late on the deadline, and um, the the contractual deadline was more important than reaching users. And then in the end, nobody was using it, and there was like vendor issues with some of the software choices that we made. So yeah, it was a great combination of a lot of things going wrong because nobody was really enthusiastic,
So,
excited about working on the project.
first of all, for everyone who's in the audience right now, if you like and you have a very great story to tell, we can grant you a 15 minutes hot join slot if you like. Then you can
Oh, nice.
join us. Just hit us on LinkedIn if you have a story, something like that, or in the comments, and we will take a look, and then we invite you.
Yeah, you can
And
comment or send us a DM on LinkedIn. We'll be looking over those. We see those now live, so that's a good spot.
and let my story. So my first story is or was in the times before we used versioning regularly. It was even before the time when we used Subversion or SVN back then. And we had a German client for a larger logistic client, and there were several thousand, I don't know, 50,000 users, something like that in the system. And it was about we shall implement a feature, but definitely not sending out the emails. It is a little bit like, don't send the emails, please don't, because as soon as you send the emails, a lot of logistical things will go on, right? And yeah, so I basically removed the flag from sending the emails, set it to simply false, right? There were no measurements, nothing like that. I just uploaded it via FTP to the server, and we tested it. It looks good, right? So I don't know. An hour later, we basically pushed that to production, the very same thing, and it was the same code, right? There was no changes. So what should go wrong? And of course, all the mails were sent out. And yeah, what actually happened? So it was a panic moment because the entire phones we had were ringing. What's going on? Why that was a horrible thing back then, a very horrible thing. I got a little bit of panic in that moment, and we didn't find out what was the reason. So I was basically doing the fix again, uploading it, and the problem was gone. And then the next problem was, then basically the contact person on the other side, she told me that, hey, okay, we need to do another fix, but make sure this time is definitely nothing going wrong. It was just half an hour later. I uploaded it again, and basically it happened again. The emails were sent out entirely, and I was shocked again. So another 50,000 emails went out, right? And another time, people were basically saying, hey, we need to send other emails that the people don't process it, that they see we have a mistake, but you need to get this under control. And the point was, so from then on, basically nothing happened anymore. But it took, I don't know, 2 hours, something like that. And we basically were going into after work already. And I met another developer who was working on the project as well. And he was wondering who was turning off the flag already. So he turned it on again and updated and patched it really quick. He was thinking, we cannot forget this, but he wasn't aware of that, and he tried to fix that problem, and there was no versioning, so he didn't see the intent behind that. There were no tests, nothing inside, something like that, and we basically, played a concurrent game on the FTP upload, right? And that was my personal biggest horror story I had. It is not that hard; it's just an email, right? But it was kinda complex to get everything under control again, because the emails, basically the people receiving that emails basically started doing things with those things. Just to understand that in the past, emails were a valid API. So we don't use that these days. I don't see that anymore, luckily. So we basically were sending an email, and it was processed by a hot folder with data. That is not very common anymore, but that was quite common 15, 20 years ago.
That's how SOAP was implemented initially. Yeah.
I hate SOAP. Probably
like
that's
the envelope. Like generally, most people know SOAP version 2, SOAP XML, which was the web protocol. But the primary usage for SOAP was the email protocol, where you make, rather than doing a post request or a get request, because it has a transaction boundary, and emails are a great transaction boundary, right? So you sent an email to start a transaction, then you got back another email that carried something, or you got a immediate response back from the actual request from the email server, and you could implement SOAP through.
Yeah, but that's actually.
I don't dare say which protocol exactly on the email side, but there is an envelope to primarily use SOAP initially through the email protocols. So the idea was that rather than having a web server with a URL, you would have, a API that has an address, and then you send messages to the address. That's what email is for. But nobody
Yeah,
thought about having bi-directional open connections and then sending responses immediately.
yeah, that's so I wouldn't recommend that anymore. And the learning of my story is you shouldn't come to the idea anymore to not use versioning for any kind of project, to not basically to not use it, right? You must use it. That's the point.
Mm.
And it is extremely important, even for smaller projects, that you basically start with versioning first,
Mm.
and to have some form of guardrails, and especially when you work as a team, that's extremely
Yeah.
important, because there are still, and I saw that, there are still projects where people start, hey, I don't need Git in the beginning. Some scaffolder don't initialize Git, so they
Yeah.
don't do that themselves. They might not exactly know how, or how Git init is actually working. So maybe they don't want to have a Git repository somewhere, right? Those kind of reasons. But that's actually a very bad thing to do, because
Mm.
every form of professional software development should be versioned today
And
in order
not
to
not
make
just
sure.
software development, everything.
Yeah,
I,
everything.
I I
Yeah.
once had a talk. One of my first talks in the industry was about introducing version control for any kind of documentation, right? So even to non-engineers,
Yeah, that's true.
right? So when the designers were exchanging documents, I asked them, "Hey guys, I know you're saving a binary format, right? Like a docx, or you might be saving an Excel spreadsheet or
Yeah,
a
but SVN was
Photoshop
was was
file."
great for that, actually.
Yeah, and I just told them, look, just put it in SVN and hit commit, and put it on Tortoise, like use the Tortoise command and use that to synchronize rather than sending each other emails, and then in the file name you say version 12 2010 final version 7 draft. Um, but even nowadays, I see a lot of non-technical or semi-technical staff not use version control, especially in game design, 3D models, etc. Because the cloud solutions are expensive for correctly versioning, semantically versioning those kinds of files. For example, if I use Google Drive, that is versioned. That is one of the reasons I use Google Drive, so that I can share the document with somebody. And if we make changes to it, the documents are, yeah, so they don't have version file names
This,
like
that's
that.
that's actually
Uh,
a very undesirable versioning system.
yeah,
Actually, it's very there line breaks missing. But that is what we see in the past, that people
yeah.
actually doing that on a file base, even in software projects. So you basically
Mm-hmm.
had a bug for backup files. You had this
Yeah.
.bug.js or
Dot back,
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. FTPing
Um,
files directly, you make a backup file before you make changes so that you
yeah,
can revert. But then you didn't
that's
didn't even
bad.
know whether the
Yeah.
revert point. You didn't even know by the time you reverted whether that's still the same file, unmodified, and back files and back to things like that.
So another horror story I need to think about, actually.
I
Do you
have,
have another?
yeah, I have one. I
Go
have quite
ahead.
a few, and I
Go
and
ahead.
I remembered. So, well, one of the things, I mean, the worst horror story that I can, sort of still remember that was a little bit more politically charged were startup politics. Um, Sort of midway through my career, I went from like agency style work to startups, um, usually Y Combinator funded startups. Um, and we had this in one of the companies, we had this issue of we're sort of employees as contractor kind of relationship. So there were like the full employees and there were the sort of contractor employees. And the C-suite, let's say the CTO and the CPO, were split among the two groups, right? So one was here in Slovenia and another one was in the US, and then we had another one sort of in the Middle East, Asia. But the big ones were in the US and in Slovenia and in Europe, essentially. Um, and we had this huge political battle at some point where people just started getting fired left, right, and center about um, the legal appropriate handoff, like who owns intellectual property, what is the correct transition point from transfer of ownership. Does ownership get transferred when the document is written, when it is checked in, when the salary arrives? We had some issues regarding that, and then it just started spiraling. It just started snowballing, spiraled out of control. We had people stealing code or stealing IP, claiming being accused of stealing IP. There were disagreements of where the product should go, and then they were threatening of spinning off a separate company and building a competitor. It was a really hot mess, and it just very quickly spiraled out of control, overnight. And then when things sort of normalized, the damage was done, and then everybody they didn't know, should they quit? Are they in the right? Are they in the wrong? Was there any, is this wrongdoing? Was this legal? So there was a lot of contention regarding what is even the right thing to do. Like, who's my boss? Like, who's my legal employer? Like, what is the appropriate course of action here now that the team has essentially disbanded, but they might still be legally bound to delivering part of the project. So that was really complicated. I don't recommend it for anybody, but the lesson that you can take from that is that if you do have a remote team and remote contracts, make it clear like who owns intellectual property and how the handoff is handled. Even when you have an employer of record, even when you're using some platform like Upwork or equivalent or remote.com, just make it very clear like how transfer gets done, and ideally solidify your access and ownership to the domain, servers, the backups, payment accounts, who owns the Git repository, things like that. Just technical due diligence, which I hope every CTO is doing. But if you're a very fast, very quickly growing startup that had its origins in sort of non-technical waters, this might have been missed, or some aspect of this might have been missed. Even if it's something benign, like who owns the SSL certificate for the domain, or under whose name is the domain, or in which country was the domain registered. Little details like that can slip under the rug very quickly, and they might cause a lot of issues.
It is especially in these kind of situation where you avoid creating a contract in the beginning because you save time and you can go without contracts. You can always do those things later. Actually, you can't.
We'll do it later when we're bigger and we have actual problems, and then you get there, and then oops.
And the problem is you do contracts. So if you don't write a contract, you still make a contract.
Yeah.
And the problem
but it's not written down.
Exactly.
It's not clear.
There's the agreement, the handshake contract. That's international law, and that's or actually probably something like that. At least in Europe.
Yeah. I mean, the email is enough. Like if there was agreement to an email and it was verified that real humans were involved, that's enough. Then the problem becomes, okay, we said something, but we wrote something else, and it wasn't agreed upon. Once it gets to that level, no court will help you because it's just going to be a huge waste of your time.
My next story is I was sitting years ago. I was sitting next to my business partner, and we were just doing a discussion shortly beforehand. I had with the dev team a short meeting where we discussed, okay, we have a migration today. Yes, let's do this migration. It was MS SQL, I think. There were some updates to do, some migrations, some data needs to be changed. We were discussing that, and I think, okay, you will do that. Everything is great, right? Yeah, everything is great. Then I basically walked over to my business partner. We were talking. My business partner, he was basically a non-technical person, but he was supporting the tech in many aspects, especially hardware and those kind of things. And we were discussing, and then one of my developers came in and said, or ask, Adrian, do you have a backup for the database?
Oh
This was
no.
the production database. And I was thinking, oh my God, yeah, of course we have a backup. So what was wrong? Of course, right? We had a little bit too much deleted, right? But that was
Mm.
actually not, okay, that was a problem. But the problem was that my business partner, who was actually responsible for the backup, said, oh, last week the backup didn't went through. And we actually had a quite old backup. And I think it was 2 weeks or something like that.
Mm.
Even though we actually spent a lot of money into these backups, but back then it was 15 years, 16 years, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, something like that. And um, it isn't like the transactional stuff wasn't to that time really working for us, and that was the first times then we actually had yeah, experience that we had a huge, let's say, a huge problem to actually get back the data to the state
Mm.
where it was. We were basically crawling other data sources and making manual updates to restore as much as possible from other sources, like
Mm.
even email accounts, something like that. We basically crawled them to get that back. That was quite horrifying. But that was this typical thing where, yeah, in the beginning you often don't really think about, hey, oh, we have a backup. Yeah, yeah, we have a backup, and no one is communicating. No one is communicating that there was actually a problem with the backup because there was
Mm-hmm.
nothing for a year. So why bother, right? It will hold 1 or 2 weeks more, right? And then something happens, and actually you are pretty blank in that moment. Um,
Yeah.
that's another thing, and another horror story as well was in a recovery case several years later where we actually had pretty good backups, but the person who basically needed to make a backup because of actually a that was we needed to shut down a server because of a Exchange server leak. There was a big problem with the Exchange server from
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft, and we basically shut down that server and wanted to recreate it from another backup, and the wrong backup was picked in that moment. So it
Mm.
was basically, I don't know exactly how, but the wrong backup was picked, and we found out, I don't know, 3 days later or something like that, and that was a mess as well. So
Mm.
you really need to have good processes when it comes to recovery, right? And that is so important to actually play through the recoveries, to have four eyes on those things when you do those things, or you have it fully automated. Then that's the best, right? But if you
Mm.
need to do it manually, don't do it alone, especially not when you're in a hurry. Think about things because it is extremely hard to revert that after several days. That is
Mm.
today we don't have that problem, these kind of problems anymore because we have so many things optimized. There are no problems like that anymore.
Yeah.
But
And cloud vendors allow you to give like provide
when it
managed
is,
backups for most services, which wasn't the case,
yeah, yeah,
20
yeah.
years ago.
We have several of them, right? And you have a lot of migration strategies, automated migrations. That helps a lot
Mm-hmm.
to actually make sure these things don't break too many things,
Mm.
and the entire workflow is more detailed, and that does make sense. So I really mean it. Those were horror stories. I don't know if they're actually funny or sound stupid, but I felt stupid, or others did so as well. And there were several of those things. That it was not the only thing. So probably several versions of that happen over a longer period of time. I just remember the first or early days of MySQL. You had these security restrictions were not by default implemented. So you could basically run update all when you actually should not be able to run it. And
Oh,
that
that's
was
quite
what.
recent. That's quite recent. Like that's those security restrictions were default since 5 years
Yeah,
ago, even 6 years ago.
yeah, probably, but not before. So I'm talking. I'm grandpa as well. So I'm talking about those things happened in the very beginning. So the production database. Hey, that was this typical thing when someone from the business came in to the development department and, hey, can you change something? There is no UI for that. Yeah, can you please change
Mm.
it in the database, right? And
Mm. Yeah.
there was this hasty thing, and the developer was on the phone and tried to do that with the other hand, and yeah,
Yeah,
right?
we once had this horror story of, it was back in the agency days. Uh, Very badly executed deployment pipeline, sort of quite unprofessional version control system. So we basically, a client came to us, they didn't have version control, they were FTPing stuff on their server. It was an Italian client, so obviously all the code was in Italian. Um, so they asked us, hey, they want to extend the product, validate it on a foreign market, and then sell it, and then sell the business. That was the idea. Most of the clients back then were Italian. And one of their processes that they wanted to automate, that they sort of have semi-automated through some external scripts, was sending invoices and formatting invoices in a pretty way. So put the official logo on, make the invoices a little bit sexier. So they hired our agency to do that. What we didn't know is that they said, oh, we want the invoices to be done on this server. On like the production invoices should go out from this server because they just wanted it that way. So we tested everything, we got it done, and then they said, okay, now you deploy it to this server, please. And we didn't control that server. And what we didn't check is what was the default locale, and what locales were installed. So language locales were installed on the server. This was in PHP 4, PHP 5 days. And what happened is that it lacked the locale that we were sending out the number formatting in for the pretty invoices. So the invoices were calculated correctly, but then in the invoice it said, instead of 499, it said 400. Because in Italian, back then, and for that type of invoice, for that type of design, they wanted commas for decimal separators, not periods. So that obviously broke. But by Italian law, whatever invoice you sent out on the graphical interface through email that counted. And there were no other invoices sent to the user. There was no other interface, which meant that the official invoices were those that we sent out through the email. So then, first of all, we had to backport all the invoice. So the official invoice had the incorrect amount. That's horrible. That's the problem number one. Problem number two, they weren't backlogged correctly into our database. So we also had to figure out who got the email, who got sent an email, and then backlog them correctly to represent that the invoice was sent incorrectly, so that it was a clerical error on our side, and that the invoice was actually passed incorrectly. However, the transactions were correct, but not for the invoice amount. And the invoice amounts obviously then had to be corrected as well. So a second invoice had to be sent. That was another procedure. And to make matters worse, the mother of the client, of the business owner, of the founder, was an accountant, and she was the CFO of the business. so there was this level there was this level of shocking to the whole situation. Plus, this was in the year where there was this huge crackdown on the Italian mafia, and the Italian financial bureau started walking around with submachine guns. The Italian tax office is something special. If you've never seen it, it's quite. I think the Italians and the Swiss have this. I think still have this protocol to have heavily armed tax inspectors, tax officers, financial officers. So all of this put together, it made for a really lousy launch on the rebrand of the startup's product. We managed to solve everything, obviously, but in the moment, the intensity of it is really, first of all, it's really clumsy. Second of all, it's like that perfect mix of oops and just do it because it's faster and we have the server already. It just makes you think that, just slowing things down and getting full ownership over the entire ecosystem before you make any changes, even though the client disagrees with that, that then really
Yeah.
um, sends the wrong message. Main lesson being, don't be a cheap agency who just fixes a project. Take over full ownership if you're gonna work on it,
Yes.
so that you can be responsibly responsible for it, so that you can be responsibly accountable for actions you make, even in the code base that you didn't write. Because even though you might not have written it, even though you might not own the server, if you're making changes to it, you might still be accountable for the mistake that happens down the line.
That's really horrible. So in total, things can cost a lot of money. And for us, luckily, it never was the case. So in those kind of cases, we were always lucky that
Mm.
things went kind of okay. So people understood. Um, but we understood the change. So that, and I think the biggest problem was for me, or not problem, actually, the best thing which could happen to me is the embarrassment to that, yeah, that those things actually could have happened. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that was one of those things why I'm so about automation and
Yeah.
simplification today, because I cannot stand anymore the idea of, hey, we need to have something very special, something very complicated. When I just remember, what I don't need to remember, we have that still in
Mm-hmm.
maintenance, those legacy systems, where we have there was the idea of, hey, can we quickly add a new server, right? Then we have
Mm-hmm.
basically had this mix of Windows servers, mix of Linux servers, mix of Nginx servers, some Docker servers, Docker Swarm servers in between, and we tried to basically. And then there was this WatchGuard firewall, this WAF thing, then, and there was so many
Mm-hmm.
components to actually run a single service. Um, that is horrible for me still today to see. And when I see that even more complex software can be simpler than this and easier to
Mm-hmm.
work with if you basically do it right, and you need to want to do that right first of all. So you need to have the mindset to actually work towards that, and to understand what's possible today, because you and we were not the only ones having these problems. That was an industry-wide problem. It was pretty much Wild West 15 years ago, right? There
Mm-hmm.
was people were just doing. Most of the people didn't even. There was not this big communication and knowledge share we have today. You have
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, you have social media, you have so many channels where people share their story. So you know so much more than you knew back then. And out of that, the entire industry developed into those simple things we have today, especially cloud. I'm a big believer in cloud native just because it is so simple. When we take a look at modern PaaS platforms, which takes you away. So I had the discussion lately where a client wanted to have a very complex pipeline to just run, because they already have that. It's not a client, it's
Mm-hmm.
actually more a partner kind of company, and they want to have in their very complex AWS manual done infrastructure, they wanted to implement some Next.js apps. And the idea behind that was so complex in that moment, and I was asking what are you actually doing. So it's just the next step, so just deploy that in the simplest way possible, right? So
Mm-hmm.
keep
Mm-hmm.
things simple, yeah. Use build pack, something like that, to keep things simple and standardized. So if you use a build pack, the cloud native foundation build pack, or the cloud native foundation build packs, if you use them, many platforms use them as well, and they are very clear and very documented. Those kind of
Mm-hmm.
things helps a lot. But as soon as you start to do things yourself, because you have more possibilities there, you do something wrong. And this is where actual horror comes from after a while. You create silos, you create stress, you create pressure, while it's simply not necessary anymore for modern types of software solution, frameworks, and stuff like that, because they are all built to run in that new simplified environment. You can do everything yourself, self-managed, but as soon as something is self-managed, it's probably too complex. And that
Mm-hmm.
is one of the biggest learnings I had, and I won't change my mind there anymore, because I have seen too much in our company. I have seen too much in other companies, and as soon as you do something yourself, you probably doing it wrong because you don't need to. It's not your job. You shouldn't do that, and that is for basically all the problems I mentioned. Maybe not the FTP upload problem back then, but for all the other problems I mostly had. These type of, hey, we've done it ourselves, we try to save some money, we try to
Mm-hmm.
do it in our way, we want to have full control. These kind of behavioral habits, right, were
Mm-hmm.
causing most of the horrors I saw until today. I see them still today running. Right, this is this typical thing, like a little startups going to AWS and
Okay, let's discuss
s-
startups. So we had some cloud stories, we had some product stories.
startups
Let's
is a good topic.
let's discuss some startup Scrum horror stories.
Scrum.
Startups and Scrum go well together. What's the last time what you worked with for mentored a startup?
Define a startup for the audience and for me, so that we all have the same image.
A company that doesn't pay salaries from profits, but rather from investments.
Hmm.
That's usually a startup.
But it is paying salaries, right?
Of course, yes, but it's paying salaries from
Because
cash reserves,
a
not from
company which
profits.
is not paying salaries for me is not a company.
No, no, it's paying salaries from cash reserves, not from profits.
Okay, basically we're doing that right now. So yeah.
Okay.
So what I can't follow.
So you tick the box for being exposed to startup life. Do you have any
Yeah.
Scrum horror stories or any agility horror stories?
Um. So the the most obvious thing is the idea of, still, this is what I'm writing about very often, is the code monkey ticket machine story, because
Mm.
that is very, let's say, very universal. So I don't know why, and I think the horror behind that is that so many companies, especially startups, yes, but traditional companies actually as well, they think, oh, we have pressure here with money. We had that on our stream already, right? With the
Yeah.
Australian, I forgot his name, I think. We had this
Yeah.
idea
That's good.
of that there's this huge disconnect between the people who actually own the money, own the product, own the business, and the people
Mm.
who shall fulfill some IT stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
that's basically in all cases a big problem. And the biggest horror stories there is, what is actually quite sad, is how quickly people get burned out in that scenario, and
Mm-hmm.
how quickly actually people leave again. And no one is doing anything about that, because
Mm.
it is very hard to actually bridge this gap between these worlds, to make
Mm-hmm.
them understand that this is actually one thing, that business and development is actually, yeah, it is it is one fellowship on a journey towards a goal. Either you succeed or you don't succeed, and
Mm-hmm.
that is very often not the case. And when it comes to agile, it is basically not treated as agile, and this is the problem, because
Yeah.
agile is actually something coming up from bottom, right? And you have this typical modern Scrum like. I wouldn't call it Scrum because I don't see that much Scrum lately, to be honest. But similar ideas behind that. This is this
I mean, I see a
top-down
lot of
control
sprints.
mechanism.
I
Sprints,
maybe
yes, this is the
yeah.
idea of sprint, but not Scrum in general. So Scrum is a
I mean,
complex
sprints are
methodology. You need to have a
well.
master, right, in order
Well, I think
to do that.
sprints were adopted from Scrum, even though like it's a weird back and forth. I would usually put
Yeah,
any.
but sprints. What is a sprint? Sprint is, you have a sprint planning, and people start to put tickets into a board, and then they try to work down the sprint.
Well, that's Scrum.
Yeah, but no, Scrum is a special. You have you have special kind of meetings. You have special kind of persons with roles, and you have ceremony and something like that.
Yeah,
In most companies I know, they just use sprints, and they have a meeting. They go for the sprints, and
I would put them in
sometimes
the
if
same bucket. Like they're
yeah
they're the
yeah
same kind of dysfunction, but but I see what you
kind of
mean.
dysfunction.
They are the
Exactly.
same kind of
And
dysfunction.
the
And so
dysfunction is that you try to control other people by defining
having
things up front.
ridiculous ceremony. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then you basically say, okay, guys, we have your tickets, we have defined them for them, and now you need to commit to that. And then people say, okay, yeah, we commit. Okay, you have committed yourself. That's great. Now you
Yeah,
need to do that.
the worst offenders I saw were in startups that were doing like all of these ceremonies. Is we had the tip jar where you had to, I don't know, pay a euro into the tip jar. So it wasn't a tip jar; it was a punishment jar. If you were talking for too long on the daily huddle, or if you missed the daily huddle, if you missed the daily stand up, or um, if you didn't attend the retrospective meeting. Like it was the worst. It was the worst kind of toxic environment. But it's a really sort of
You need to pay to go to
strong.
work. That's great.
It's a really strong emphasis on like doing cultural change badly, even when it's well-meaning, and especially when the underlying methodology that is being pushed is in itself dysfunctional and nobody's sort of putting that on the table and nobody's questioning it. Working in an environment like that then really taught me the lesson of just question everything. In the next company, just have the courage to question everything, to say, hey, why are we having this meeting? Why are we having this meeting every day? Why are these meetings so long? Why is everybody invited? Why is everybody expected to be there? What's the agenda? Why do we have meetings without agendas? And then that really got the ball rolling for me. Just question everything, be a little bit more exact on communication, be a little bit more exact on planning, invest more time into design. That has helped me tremendously. But going through the toxic ringer of just going through like the bad experiences first, they really created a strong distaste for Scrum and similar dysfunctions. At least in my mind, at least from my sort of early professional experiences in
I think
this
the
topic.
most horrifying things is when developers actually are in that kind of environment and they basically don't have enough time to do their things because it's software development, it's development, so you actually don't know exactly how long it will take.
Mm.
You need to develop the way to the goal, right? And
Mm.
you always do these shortcuts. I always see that shortcuts is this one of the most horrifying things, and this deadline-driven development. So you need to get
Yeah.
things done. You take shortcuts as a team, and then everyone says, "Yeah, you are finished," even though
Yeah, we'll fix it later.
it is
Yeah, I say you're
it is
finished.
actually overdue anyway, right? So you have this double pressure already. You are
Mm.
in one way happy that you are done, but no developer really feel good in that moment because they
Mm.
know exactly it is not as it's supposed to be. It is not as
Mm-hmm.
good. It is
Mm-hmm.
not as tested. It is not as well thought through. It is not as refactored as it
Mm.
should be. It's too complex. We never reduce the complexity in that moment. And then you have that. You already get assigned a new task because, time efficiency. That's important, efficiency. Someone gives you new deadlines. It's important to keep you running, right? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's like the whip. The whip must go, right. The Scrum whip, and you have that feeling that you need to move, and you have in your head exactly that other thing will explode, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
once you are then in the new thing, suddenly the problems of the old
Mm-hmm.
thing comes in, and you get called, you get tickets, you get new emails, you get you need
Mm-hmm.
to fix that urgently, and then you basically say, okay, the developer saying, hey, you can't fix that urgently, we need, but
Mm.
and then this typical thing, yeah, but why haven't you done it correctly in the first place? You're incompetent. Those kind of things. And sounds funny, but that isn't funny for the developers at all. That is one of the I probably that was the number one reason for people to leave companies. Is that reason?
Mm.
So as
I mean,
soon as they
I see it a
have
lot.
the chance, they
I help a lot
actually
of
leave.
developers look for new jobs right now quite successfully. Um, and one of the main things I hear the most is that they are very strict in what kind of engineering culture. Like they see my content, they're being coached by me, so we set a very high example, and they immediately say they don't want to work in a team that doesn't do continuous delivery, or they don't want to work in a team that doesn't do TDD, or they don't want to work in a team that does some like weird heavy-handed agile ceremony, which is nice to see. But it is coming from the place of, okay, you must have had a lot of bad experiences, to be so strongly
Yeah,
adamant
people have, and I think this is the
on this
modern
point.
horror story because it became popular. I don't know, some years ago, 8 years ago, it became popular with the idea of they need to be Scrum Master, not a project management anymore. And for
Yeah,
me, to
the
be
agile
honest,
coaches, scrum masters, and
I compare that type
yeah.
when I see
I mean, we
the
saw the Uncle Bob episode with Primogen, right? We had that. We
yeah.
did a reaction on one Friday. Um, he said there that there was this shift when they started selling certifications for Scrum and Agile,
Hmm.
where all the non-technical project managers sort of swarmed into the space and started, dominating the
Yeah.
entire scene with ceremonies. We had a question regarding ceremonies by Caesar.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know whether Caesar is your first name. I do apologize, or whether that's your surname.
Caesar, yeah, it's a follower.
Um,
Retrospective, those kind of things. So
regarding
you have the
ceremonies, yeah. So daily
daily stand-ups.
stand-ups, daily meetings, retrospectives, sprint plannings are probably the worst. Um,
That's rolling the dice.
backlog grooming, estimation meetings, estimation poker. What did I miss?
Burn down reviews sometimes.
Burn down
Those,
reviews and um, uh, brainstorming sessions for the backlog, or splitting up tickets, creating tickets.
the
Um,
interesting part is
those
that
were the
so many
worst tendencies.
companies try to when those ceremonies happen, they try to keep the developers actually out of the planning ceremonies and
Mm,
in the fulfillment ceremonies. So that is so awful to see because that is
mm,
not the original idea of that. The original idea of that is that Scrum is actually working inside the development team, and then it suddenly become this executive instrument where
mm-hmm.
executives and project managers can basically control several teams and try to steer them into the right direction with guardrails. And that is not how development works. This is not how humans can create complex systems.
Yeah.
This is how you would build something when it's already planned. So
Mm-hmm.
you know how much. If you build a wall or something like that and it's planned and you have all the plannings, you have all the OKs already, the engineering part is already done, and
Mm-hmm.
you're now at the construction part, then it makes sense. But the
Yeah.
tickets are not a valid engineering blueprint. They are not planned. It is yet to be done, right? And that is the problem. And but you treat it as execution, and that's one of the biggest problems. One of the no, it is the biggest horror right now. Let's label it like that. How it is. This year alone, I saw two people
Mm-hmm.
leaving just because of that.
Yeah.
I know from other companies that they had problems with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And these days, working culture, maybe as well because we not only have the let's say the technical changes, we have the cultural change as well. The entire society on this planet changes, of course. We are more transparent. We have new ways to think about things. We have Gen Z, those kind of things, and a bad workplace matter more than it was in the past. So 20
Yeah.
years ago, everyone accepted such an environment because it was basically we just left the industrial age and it was normal
Yeah.
to work like that. So you were accepting what your boss was telling you. That was normal,
I,
right?
I
Until you
worked
actually step up to be your boss yourself.
I worked with a client last year. Uh, I coached the team, and it was really difficult for them because they inherited a huge code base. There was a lot of culture issues
Mm,
in regards to how the relationships were formed between the engineering department and upper management and product management and support. And the CEO, well, the most product-oriented C-level, there are COOs, CTOs who wanted different things in the higher ups. And the team got backed into a corner. The team got backed into a corner where they were put into an environment where they couldn't be efficient. It was impossible for them to be efficient. And they had a choice to make. They either have to reconnect with the people they don't like very much, or they have to leave.
Yeah.
They have to leave to somewhere where they can be efficient, because their lack of efficiency actually is inviting them to be toxic, is inviting them to be lethargic. And they basically got just two bad options: connect with the people who mistreated you, or leave. And if you decide to do nothing, and they were so checked out, so burnt out, that indecision was very much high on the priority list. They're so checked out that should they stay and do nothing, they will get fired, because they're working in an environment where they cannot possibly be efficient, right? Because they are so siloed. It requires way too much ceremony. It requires way too much oversight. It requires way too much micromanagement. And in such a session, in such a sort of control-driven environment, the trust is so low that their best work is simply unavailable to them unless they force themselves to sort of build new bridges very quickly.
Yeah.
Which was great for a short while, as we got sort of full buy-in from the company to run experiments, to rekindle these lost relationships. But then, one key person leaves, and it sort of lost its momentum, and it quickly went back to the state it was. And I see a lot of teams stuck in that. And I see you highlighted Ryan's comment.
Mm-hmm.
And put it on screen. We can put it on the screen and I can read it.
That's new.
My biggest issue with sprint planning is that we spend 10% of the time getting on the same page about what direction to run for the next 2 weeks. This feels good. Yeah, I agree that is the important part. And we spend the next 90% of the time debating how far we think we will run in 2 weeks. No matter how accurate we are, I can assure you we will get farther by spending all the time running. Yet, this is one of the primary things that I end up discussing with my coaching clients as well, is that and thank you for your question. Thank you for your comment, Ryan. It's good to see you. I know you wanted to be there last time for the previous episode, and I hope we did get to address your question that you posted.
I just dressed myself as a Scrum Master.
You're a Scrum Master now. So one of the most annoying things that I witness with teams is scary. Adrian has arrived.
Let's do a retrospective.
Well, one of the biggest issues that I faced with that I see, that I witness, that I shadow with the teams that I'm coaching is the too high focus on planning, right? So on the inaccurate parts of the planning, where there's way too much speculation, where it's not quite clear, are we hedging bets? Are we guessing? Is this risk management? Are we building a roadmap? And usually it's super regimented. It's like vision, key milestones, OKRs, roadmap, epics, and then we're doing some kind of sprint plan. And the sprint planning is all that. The sprint planning is meant to be all that, where we say, that's our goal. We're not changing that. We're going to change how we build it the right way, and then to figure out how to create feedback loops to figure out whether we're building the right thing. Like those are the two key elements. And one of the biggest productivity boosts that I can always tell leaders is to simply stop inviting in contrast to what you said about sprint plannings being done in isolation from the engineering team, what I controversially um, recommend leaders as a transition period to do is to stop inviting engineers who are busy, right? So is to stop this idea of, oh, let's have a default sprint planning every Monday, and then if they're not busy, let's interrupt what they're doing, and then let's have another meeting session. Especially when there's 7 people doing 7 different things, and then you interrupt everybody, and then you have another planning meeting. I always tell them, stop inviting people who are busy. Only invite the people who said, I have finished everything, or they have said, I'm not going to finish it and I need a meeting. And stop inviting them by default. And then it gets leadership to think about, no, but if I don't interrupt them, they won't get to me. And then we can have a conversation about, okay, so they're constantly late. Why are we planning so much? Right? So if you know they're going to be late and you have to interrupt them, what does that tell you?
I think that is one of the problems, that you you mix strategic planning with operational planning in that moment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it is one thing to plan in which direction should the product go, and yes, the developers aren't part of that. It doesn't make sense. But as soon as you meet somewhere in the tactical layer,
Mm-hmm.
you are basically bound on prawn to the realistic circumstances, which means that the team. So you set some qualities that is very important, and many companies don't do that. The so-called NFRs, for example. So
Yep.
the non-functional requirements. You want
Or,
to have
or, or,
some.
or just some form of SLI, that a service level indicator, right? So it might be that we're just looking at a number, and that number is really important to us, and we had a,
Yeah,
you
for
know,
example,
we
that
want to
that
make the number go up or change or meet a certain target by deploying more software next week.
Yeah, but
That in itself might
let's
be
take a
enough.
very simple quality most companies have, and that is the we don't want to get negative feedback after a release. So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if the release is daily or once a month. So
Mm-hmm.
we want to have a stable experience. That is a quality we set ourselves. And
Yeah.
if we go to the development team and do this deadline driven development thing with them, and they
Mm-hmm.
basically, it is downward spiral, it becomes worse and worse,
Mm-hmm.
then we basically hurt ourselves. And this is what we need to understand. So, what I mean with reality is, if you want to meet these qualities, then you have, in reality, another pace than your deadlines. You have a pace. You will see how fast you will be in that week and in the next week, and on some
Mm-hmm.
point you have a rough feeling how fast you actually are, in
Mm-hmm.
which circumstances, and even that is just an estimation. It can be worse.
Adrian,
Maybe.
I've been in the industry for 20 years. I have never seen leaders, especially non-technical leaders,
Mhm.
develop this feeling. You're just not gonna, unless you were trained to spot it, trained in some form of statistical knowledge, trained in some form of
Yeah, but this is the
uh,
disconnect. You can remove that.
engineering
It is
engineering
possible.
intelligence,
Yeah.
in regards to Dora metrics or something similar.
Mhm.
Nobody develops this feeling for their own team that they've spent 5 years, 10 years. It's very rare for somebody to just
Mm.
get it on their own. It requires,
Yeah, but
I
that is
think,
that
I
is the
think it
original idea of
requires
agile. To be honest, that is the original
exactly,
idea. That
exactly.
is to find out how fast you can do things, and yeah, and get the
I
feedback.
would,
Because
I would actually, I wouldn't be that. I would challenge that, you know, and particularly your usage of the word fast. Um, I think, I had a interview with Dave Farley last month. Like, I just recently got around to actually
Mhm.
writing about it in my newsletter, and sort of going over it again and sort of answering those questions that we didn't have time to cover in the episode. And he worded a key statement very well. He said the The point, as far as engineering is concerned, is to set, and Dora metrics and everything, is to set a level of quality and then figure out how good is the quality of our software. And then in regards to speed, how frequently can we deploy changes at that level of quality? Right? So that this idea that release cadence is directly tied to quality.
That is what I meant.
And a lot of people
you
might
need to
miss
figure
that.
that out. You need to
Right? So you need to set it. So the key point isn't that we have Scrum or Agile or some kind of ceremony and we release every week. That's not the point. And how much can we release in this week? But to first figure out what is our desired level of quality, to set it, as you said, you talk a lot about defining your level of quality, whatever that means for you. It might be a KPI of some kind. You might, feedback of some kind. You may want your NPS score to not drop below a certain level, at least not without raising some alarm bells. You might want your availability score to be at a certain level. You might want each feature to be tested in a certain way. You might want to do canary deploys before you do primetime deploys. You might want to reach customers a certain way. You might want to respond in a certain timely manner. You might want to handle support in a certain way. You might want to handle bug fixes a certain way. But whatever it is, just define your level of quality. Then you need to measure it in a way, and you need to define it in such a way that it is measurable. And when the measurements tell you you're not reaching the quality, all of those negative measurements have to be actionable. That is part of the definition process. It's not good enough to have a retrospective with your team and say, meh, this week was really bad. No, all of the negative feedback has to be actionable. Otherwise, it's not worth measuring.
Yeah, for example, and that is what the deadline-driven stuff, get back to that one.
Yeah.
The deadline-driven stuff is
not
it is ignoring that fact, what we just said. And
yes.
that is the core point, and we are actually agreeing here. So when you set your quality and you see it's not working, then you need to find out why it's not working. And when you see, hey, we're taking too many shortcuts, which is most often the case, we try to get too early to the point and we don't do it right, we don't reduce the complexity, we don't do those kind of things. Then the actionable item would be to either provide more time or reduce the amount of features we build, which is more time as well for other things to get things done, or we lower the quality. And you need to ask that then to the people who actually sit at the very top, who decide things, and
I
ask them.
I would challenge that. I would not lower the quality.
No.
No. That is not a sensible thing to do.
No. What I mean is you go to the person, and that is what I mean. You go to the person. That can be an external client, an external stakeholder. That can be internal stakeholders, can be the CEO, can be a PO. And you tell them, hey, do you want a lower quality? Or do you provide more time and sometimes more budget? Those kind of things. And you will always hear, no, we can't lower the quality. You will always hear that.
Absolutely.
And then suddenly, when you do that more often and you can narrate this correctly, you will see results, and have done that several times very successfully, to change the relationship from fulfillment to partner. And that's a great change. And suddenly you have this time. But on the other side, you as a development department, you need to start to communicate and provide feedback up the vertical. That is extremely important. Be transparent and don't hide your stuff. That is the other side. Because otherwise, after some weeks, they start to distrust again, and it all goes back into deadline-driven development. Because deadline-driven development is based on lack of trust. That's the real reason. So there is business pressure, and people don't trust that the people at the bottom actually execute well. So we need to pull the whip, right? And that is so we are on this topic agreeing, and I would say it is the biggest horror story right now these days. It wasn't 15 years ago somehow. Not for me, not for the companies.
I mean, it's great for me because it gives me a lot of business, as a coach, focusing on TDD and continuous delivery and
So
and
you
such.
have two businesses. You either coach the CEOs to do deadline driven, and you teach the companies then afterwards to get out of it. Yeah, that's a good thing.
No, but to reiterate Ryan's comment, um, the solution isn't to plan more, because the planning also cuts into your time to being able to execute, right? So however, what I don't see a lot of teams do, and which is why I started developing those programs and those sort of gamified programs to do more release planning, to do more, the one that I presented last week regarding planning accuracy, is to design more, right? So I really like what Adam Dimitruk is doing with the event modeling community. It's sort of coming from the opposite angle of, let's design the software together, and then let's see how the design evolves as the business understands what the engineers are doing, right? So when we get to the point where we get so technical that the business doesn't understand what the engineers are talking about, at that point all of our estimations are out the window, which means that any kind of agreement about planning become risky because we are no longer aligned. So they are creating a sort of semi-technical document to say, okay, what does this software do in very simple language? And when it is no longer clear what it is doing, right? So it becomes difficult to design the pieces of the software about how the flow goes, or how it can go wrong, or what the consistency rules are, or what the user is expecting to see and in what order. Then agreements or guarantees are sort of very, very, very inaccurate from that point onward. And you just keep doing this. Too technical, gotta split it up. It's too big, right? So I really like Sandon Hugendorns, whom I had the pleasure of meeting in Bucharest a few weeks ago. Is, he doesn't talk about right sizing or about getting the tickets into like a sprint size. He aims primarily to answer the question of, is it too big? To constantly hammer down this fact of, is it too big? Because you want actionable feedback immediately, and you don't want to be even focusing on it if it's so big that you can't even get on the same page with, I don't know, the 6 people that need to be involved in order to plan it properly.
That's overly complex.
I've recently read, or sort of started reading, the 37 Signals thing. They have like a project management book coming out. I wasn't aware of this. And the methodology that they were talking about was called, I need to check. The methodology they were talking about is called Shape Up. Shape Up. And what stuck with me from Shape Up was this idea that they say they don't cut scope to fit the 6-week timeline that they've set for themselves. They hammer scope, right? So they're really adamant about everything that is not, it is a bet. It's not a deadline. This is not a project. It's a bet. We're betting. We're gambling. It's an experiment. And we want to hammer out everything out of this experiment that doesn't really need to be there. So everything that isn't positively contributing to the outcome of the experiment, we are hammering out. We are removing. We're not talking about it. We're not planning for it. We're not even planning for the eventuality of talking about it or planning about it or adding it to the system, but just getting it through. Is that the correct link? Really? Why is it 6? Do you know?
No. I was just clicking.
Yeah, this is what I was talking about. But it's the other link. It's /ShapeUp. It's basecamp.com/ShapeUp. That's the actual book. This was the blog post that announced it. I'm not endorsing it yet. I haven't tried it, and I haven't read the book yet. But there are some ideas there that simplify the language about these processes. What I've come to respect from my conversation with Dave Farley was this idea that he was talking about. He's huge on continuous delivery. I mean, he wrote the book, right? So I mean, but but he really focused on
He had
this
something
idea
to
of,
do with continuous delivery, but can't
he always
remember what it
focused
was.
he always focused on this idea that he always wants his software to be deployable on demand. That's what continuous delivery is about. And the 2024 DORA report just came out, and the ThoughtWorks radar just got the technology radar just got updated, and continuous deployment made it into the adopt circle, the tightest, closest, most stable circle. Continuous deployment made it into that circle finally after almost 20 years. So what Dave said was something really interesting, and I had to ask him a few times to get the detail right, because he kept talking about this idea that when your software is continuously deployable and deliverable, and it's deployable on demand, having a meeting every time you deploy something becomes ineffective, right?
Yeah.
So the team is moving so fast that the technical cadence cannot match the social cadence. Because he kept talking about this idea that, oh yeah, every 2 weeks this, every 2 weeks that, every 2 weeks this, and I kept thinking, and I just kept thinking, this sounds like Scrum. This sounds like Scrum. What am I missing? This sounds like Scrum. And I had to make it very explicit, Dave, but this is continuous delivery, right? And he said, yes. So what are you doing on those 2 meetings? Oh, we just get together and celebrate. And and then it clicked for me. It's like, oh, of course, it's not a planning meeting. It's social meeting. Right, so they are moving so fast that they are basically communicating with the team through pairing sessions and TDD.
Exactly.
They're planning releases all the time. They are communicating about scope and alternatives and trade-offs all the time. So
Yes.
they're doing all of the important activities all the time, every day, every hour. And they're releasing every day, every hour, on demand as needed.
It is the most natural
And
thing you can do. This is
it's the
how
most
you would
natural
work in a
thing you can
team.
do,
Yeah.
but you have to take a break, because this kind of constant high performance workflow is really intense, and it's really hard to take a break and just sit down with the team and talk.
To be honest, I have to disagree. We're doing CD in all our projects.
With non-engineers, especially who are not ensembling with the team. That's really important.
Yeah, but it is possible because once you are in a flow of CD, many problems actually disappear,
Yeah,
and you don't
absolutely.
have that pressure anymore.
Yes.
It is sounded right now that there's a lot of pressure, and hey, it's 10x developer, and you're always like, oh, we're so fast. This is the autobahn. No,
What I
it's
meant
not.
is that
It is
what I
actually
meant
not.
is that it's chill and calm.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, if you try to then synchronize it with any kind of work-related meeting, those meetings get in the way, right? So the team has to slow down in order to meet some kind of regimented planning session. Like we meet every week to discuss the roadmap. No, like the team has to inappropriately slow down and split up their routine in order to meet any kind of regular cadence, which is why I also recommend team leads that I'm coaching that, hey, if you need to have ceremonies, make sure they don't sync up on the calendar. Have the ceremonies when the team finishes something. Have the ceremonies when the team needs the ceremony.
What actually helped a lot for me in my environment was to really make clear that if someone does have the need for a short meeting or just a short conversation, then provide that time. It doesn't matter if you do something right now. I don't care anymore. And if you're a person who revokes that, you're actually not part of my company anymore. That is how I treat it. Because if you are not willing to communicate basically on short notice, then you can't play. It is continuous delivery is more like playing a football game, right? And you need to offer yourself.
I don't see the analogy. I don't see. I don't see that.
But I do. Sorry, it's totally like that. You have an intense time. You have an intense time, especially in the first part of the week, which can be the 90 minutes of the game or the half of the something like that. And you need to get things done. Everyone knows that there are several tickets. They are floating around. You know that these 2 people working on this one on that. And when this one is finished, I need to do something. This is how it actually works. It is going some tickets, you have some tickets there, but the tickets are more like knowledge sharing platforms that you have some form of
Yeah,
notes, and you
yeah.
basically pass the tasks to the other part of the specialists in the team, and
Hmm.
this requires to be open to take something. It's like passing the ball to someone. You pass,
Hmm.
hey, I need you something. Can you please quickly fix that in the API, because that doesn't actually work like that when I implement in the front end. Yeah, wait. 5 minutes later, I can just pull. You pull, and you have the new version.
Yeah.
Then you go
I
on. And
love
this
I
is what
love
I mean.
working like that. I love working like that. I
And
think
that is like playing football. It is totally like
yeah.
playing football on the soccer field. It is not the planning of
But
football.
but it's
It is
like
like
sport.
playing.
It's like a collective sport. Like the element isn't that
Yes.
it's football. The element is that
Yeah.
it is collective sport, right? So
Yes.
it is ensembling. It
Yes.
is
And not football in
synchronous.
my mean soccer, of course. But
We got that part. We're all
yeah, yeah.
Europeans here, except Ryan. um, no, but I get that. Yeah, I get that. You know, one of the biggest dysfunctions that I see, and I am conscious of time. I see we're a little bit over. One of the biggest dysfunctions I see that, especially when it comes to these elements, is when the team is just used to having the meetings and they say, "Oh, we found something really important. Should we call a meeting?" And they say, "No. We have our next meeting in 2 days. Let's discuss it then." And that is the worst. Like that, th- that
What's
is the
until then,
worst.
right? You
Yeah,
build on
exactly.
the
Because what are you gonna do? I'm just gonna do something else until then, and then
remove
we
the
discuss it.
roadblocks. This is a
Yeah,
roadblock. You need
just
to
and it's
remove it.
just so
Otherwise, parts of the
artificial.
team. And then
Yeah,
you
and
start new things because you let them, and
yeah,
in 2 days you.
yeah,
What was the problem again? I can't remember. And
yeah.
then you'd actually make mistakes. It doesn't matter then if you do testing or something like that. You will probably forget very important aspects you had present to that specific time, and you need to be open for that. And that
Oh,
same counts for,
I
as you
had
said.
a horror story. I had a terrible experience with a QA lead in one of the startups that just adopted like this whole QA ceremony regarding the launch. Uh, and they had they had two launch windows every week, Tuesday and Friday, and they were QAing something that I really needed. I was focusing on it with my team, 24/7. It was number one. We even said, hey, this will require full attention from QA. We will be doing QA as well. The team, like everybody will be on this. If we can't pass QA, we will fix it immediately until it passes. Like we're not working on anything else. You can use the team as a QA resource because we'll be fixing it while you're running it and we see it fail. And they did something that it upset me so much. They, rather than giving us feedback on our work, they delayed running tests for our deliverable. They batched it together with other changes from other teams, and then they ran the tests. It failed, and then they said, "Oh, I batched it together. Here's like the new release candidate failed. Here's everything that went wrong. We can try again on the next release window." And we had it fixed immediately. And I said, "Okay, let's do it now." And I said, no, I have a next release window in 4 days. I need to document this. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
This is the reason why I
It was one of the
personally
rare moments. It was one of the rare moments that I
a
raised my voice
disconnected
and I
QA
really
is one of the worst things you can have. You can have when you actually want to be in any form continuous, because and that is what I personally always prefer, is that QA should happen during development and not after development, because that is a very weird thing. I understand that in several business sectors or health or something like that, you need to have an additional version, which makes sure that something is like that. But
Mm.
especially when it comes to startups, especially in the small to medium sized sector where most developers on this planet work, you have not the need for an external department, even in the same company or another company, who is
Like,
checking like black
and this
box
is the
type thing of
and this is the
software
shift
sometimes.
left movement, right? Of just do it closer to the product
Yeah,
being developed,
exactly. And
not
then
part of the
instead
delivery
of
process.
doing some form of QA engineering outside of the development, teach the developers and help them
Exactly.
integrating
Support
into
them.
the processes.
Yeah.
That makes way more sense. You are
Yeah.
faster, it is clearer, less problems, less cost. It is in every aspect, it is more efficient.
To me, TDD is the closest that it gets to what you just said. You know,
Yes.
coaching a team, connecting QA with the engineering team, coaching everybody in TDD practices, getting everybody on board and like using like particular language regarding behavior decomposition and what we want the software to do
And
and
even
what are the
if you
important
don't,
details,
so
the unimportant ones.
there
Like
are companies who
it's one of the
refuse to
best
do
things.
there are some companies who refuse TDD. Yeah?
I think
And
it's individual leaders in those companies. I wouldn't say
yes,
that
but
it's
even
company
then,
policy.
you can move the QA people into the development team as well, and
Oh, of
let
course,
them
of
just
course.
work together. It is the aspect that they are closely working together. Is hey, I found a problem here, and then the developer is quickly doing something about that. That is the idea. So of course, TDD, in my opinion, as well, is superior in that moment, but if you
Usually.
don't have that because of circumstances, you can't do it without as well. Okay, we have 2 comments and
Last
then I
comment,
would say
last
say
comment,
wrap
because
up.
then we should wrap up. Yeah, yeah. James has a series. Okay, music for pressure. Good, good. You want to put I'll put the comment on screen.
That's
Well,
great. The new
well, the comment
that's
is
great,
the only thing.
great.
The comment is
Thank
the
you,
only thing.
StreamYard. We only pay 50% more than now for that. That's great.
The
We
font
pay
used
more,
to be
so we get
smaller,
more.
right?
More. We get more.
The font used to scale down, right? Well, before,
I don't know.
or was this because maybe it's my bad? Did I put this setting on?
No, it is. It is. No, it's
Okay,
not.
let's
It's
read
not
what James. Let's read what James said. So James said, "What I dislike with Agile is a focus on pushing out features and cutting out making tooling and developer experience extremely easy and simple, and that takes hard work. Upfront Scrum ceremonies that takes hard work. Upfront ceremonies only take away from having a project easy to set up. Tries to refocus away from feature creep like vertical slice architecture, delegating one dev to create the walking skeleton, and other devs are a resource. Lack of teamwork where it matters, even with pairing and mobbing." Your comments here, Adrian?
It is actually what we said, isn't it?
Yeah.
In
I would highlight. I heard this great. I don't know if it was Andrea or Alan Holub on LinkedIn this morning, I think. But it was this idea that I think it was Alan Holub on LinkedIn today, that a properly agile team doesn't have feature creep. That there is no feature creep, scope creep, whatever you want to call it. It's what agile is. Like we commit to outcomes, we commit to achieving a certain goal. Feature creep is what it's all about. Like we want to change scope, we want to expand scope, make scope smaller, make scope different. Like we want to be able to change our minds as we build.
We want to stay realistic, because feature creep is the unrealistic wish list Christmas thing, which we actually never get.
So the context of Alan's comment was this idea that you have a planning meeting and you know upfront what you'll be working on and what you'll not be working on, and that it is in some way bad for productivity that you deviate from the plan. Like it's the deviation that we want as soon as possible when you learn about, when you basically get the reality check regarding the feasibility of what it was you were building, or whether you will make the level of quality, or whether you will make the QA round, or whether you'll make the I see this a lot with QA pipelines, or just just CI tools, like build tools with a team who is not doing continuous delivery, because I always frequently I see them set up the CI/CD pipeline in such a way that it goes linter first, unit test for the linter first, then unit tests, then integration tests, then end-to-end tests, then they run the smoke tests. And I always look at that and I say, like, why? And it takes 3 hours potentially. Yeah, and I usually tell them, guys, like, just run the thing that is most likely to fail first. so that the developer can respond to them before they go to lunch. You know, and it usually gives this, yeah, of course, because we don't need to run the unit test and enter first, right? So because if the end-to-end tests are the most likely thing to fail, and it take a very long time, then don't lint it, don't build it, run the end-to-end test first, and then do the other things. Because a lot of teams do permutations, you know, like a lot of unit tests. So they have 100 end-to-end tests and 10,000 unit tests. And then the unit tests take a very long time to just permutate through, or they take up a lot of resources just to spin up a lot of parallel. It's powerful, but it takes time to spin up the parallel systems and build them properly. But if it's a very simple smoke test or end-to-end test that will fail half of the time, just run that first. Or run that in parallel. Rant off. More about this next week.
Okay, I've turned on the music a little bit louder so you can
Okay.
calm down slowly.
What are we doing next week?
I forgot.
Let's check.
Yeah, next week. Let's take a look. We
Is
have
it the guest slot next week?
probably, maybe. Calendar view.
Calendar
It
view.
is guest people.
Guest people.
No stream. No. Huh? Halloween stories. No. How to web. It's next week. Your play. You do next week. How to web review. You said.
Okay. Am I? Really? Is that what we agreed to?
That's what's in the calendar for 6th of November. And alternative guest slot. Alternatively, another guest slot. This is what you have written.
Okay.
So you can decide. Just tell me.
No,
And
it's
if
okay.
there-
Yeah, it's in the calendar, so it must be true. So that's what we're gonna do. Okay, I'm gonna prepare something.
So, what do you think about 17 CST or so in easier terms for everyone here, 1 hour later to start than usual?
I mean, not this year. Not this year. I wouldn't experiment with the. Right now, I have, you know, I'm synced up with school time, with kindergarten time and Asia's schedule. So
Okay, just
Ju-
asking because
yeah,
of the US
it's not feasible for me. I mean, even now, just going over, if we started 35 minutes ago and we would go on for like an hour and a half, that would be too late. Plus, it cuts into bedtime, and now the kids are going to bed earlier since we did the daylight saving transition, and they're not accustomed to it yet, so it's a hard no for me. You are streaming tomorrow with Stefan, right?
Yeah.
At 5?
He suggested a topic, and I wanted to stream short streams more often, and we do it a little later than this one.
Yeah.
And you're thinking of I want to have just a stream for my content itself, just recording streams.
Cool.
And I try to do them in the evenings then, just to experiment a little bit with the US and the EU at the same time.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
do
because you
that.
catch the US morning and EU evening,
Yeah.
and then sort of overlaps.
That's the reason for that.
Yeah.
I try to post my videos now in the evenings as well,
Mhm.
for a while, because in the mornings are actually all the other content creators actually there.
Yeah. I
But
post
the
on
shadow
LinkedIn in the
audience
evening
is
now as
actually
well.
working, and
Yeah.
that the people who actually should see those things don't have really time to watch videos, right? Even though
Awesome.
it's just a 1 minute video. In the afternoon, it's a little bit different. So take a look. You just actually take a look there.
All right.
Okay.
So I'll be talking about my experience on how to web next week.
Good, yeah.
And hopefully we'll be confirming our first guest for the next guest episode. You mentioned George wanted to join. Giorgio wanted to join, and I need to reconnect with.
We could
Oana,
take Georgia's, actually. It's, if you
Yeah.
like.
Yeah,
It's a bit junior topic. I could schedule that together with him if you like. We can do that.
Let's do intros quickly and then see if it's even feasible in that time slot, and then take it from there. Okay,
Okay, good.
awesome.
See you, everyone.
Cool episode today. See you.
Thanks for the comments. Thanks for the interest. Thanks for
Ciao.
Thanks for listening to the horror stories. Ciao, everyone.